When we think of the Middle Ages, our minds usually jump to knights in shining armor, huge castles, and, well, a lot of farmland. But behind all that, a quiet revolution was taking place inside stone walls, the rise of the medieval city. So let's dive in and uncover the real story, the gritty, chaotic, and surprisingly modern world that helps shape our own. The big selling point of a medieval city was simple: safety. Those high walls were like a giant shield against the dangers of the outside world, like raiding armies or bandits. But here's the twist. As thousands of people poured in seeking that safety, they found a whole new set of dangers waiting for them right inside the walls. And that paradox, that tension, is really what city life was all about. So what was it really like to walk through those city gates? Let's step inside, past the guards and walls, and take a look around. Okay, just try to imagine the sensory overload for a second. The streets, not paved. So the minute it rained, you're wading through thick mud. And that mud was mixed with, well, everything. Animal and human waste was just tossed out into the street. The houses were mostly wood, and they were crammed together so tightly that a single spark could take out an entire neighborhood. And because the city couldn't expand past its walls, the only way to grow was up. That meant more and more floors were added, creating these dark, narrow, overcrowded alleys, which, you guessed it, were the perfect breeding ground for disease. So this begs a pretty big question, right? Faced with constant threats of fire, filth, and plague, why on earth would anyone choose to live here? Why did these cities keep getting bigger and bigger? Well, the answer isn't in the streets themselves, but in the people and the radical new kind of society they were building. See, inside the city walls, the old feudal system, with lords at the top and peasants at the bottom, was starting to break down. In its place, a completely new social structure was emerging. And this one wasn't based on who your father was or how much land you owned. It was based on skill, trade, and money. And if you want to understand the medieval city, you have to understand this one concept: the burgerai, or the citizen tree. These were the weavers, the bakers, the blacksmiths, the merchants. They weren't nobility, but they also weren't serfs tied to the land. They were a brand new middle class, and they were the engine that drove everything that made the city work. Now, this new urban ladder had its own layers. At the very top of the citizenry, you have the patricians. These were the super wealthy merchants who basically ran city politics. Just below them, you had all the skilled craftsmen and shopkeepers. But, and this is a huge but, not everyone was a citizen. There was a massive population of unskilled workers who had none of the rights or protections of the burgerai. This created a huge gap between the people with power and the people without. So you have this chaotic, crowded city filled with a new kind of social class. How in the world do you keep it from falling apart? Well, they had to get organized, and they did it by inventing some pretty incredible new systems to control their work, their safety, and their future. And the absolute cornerstone of this new urban world was the guild. Now, think of a guild as more than just a workers' union. It was like a union, a quality control agency, and a social club all rolled into one. Guilds set prices, they made sure nobody from outside the city could come in and undercut them, and they enforced strict quality standards. They even acted like a social safety net, taking care of a member's family if they got sick or died. In a really chaotic world, the guilds created order. And the guilds gave you a clear path to success. You'd start out as a leerling, an apprentice, learning the ropes from a master. After years of that, you'd become a gazelle or a journeyman. You'd often travel to other cities, picking up new skills. And finally, the last step. To become a true master, you had to create a meesterproof, a masterpiece. If it was good enough, you earned the right to open your own shop and become a full-fledged member of the guild. This newfound economic power didn't take long to turn into political power. It was a total game changer. Before, a distant lord made all the rules. Now, citizens were starting to govern themselves. They set up their own courts, they collected their own taxes for things like roads and bridges, and they elected their own councils, called Schwepenen, to run the city's day-to-day affairs. So when you put all these pieces together, the guilds, the citizen councils, this whole new social class, they created something truly revolutionary. A city that acted like its own independent little country. And maybe the most radical thing they did was this. They created their own laws. That meant the Lord's rules stopped at the city gate. Inside, the city's law was what mattered. This was a massive declaration of independence. They were saying, we are our own community, and we live by our rules. And they enforced those laws themselves. Citizens were judged by other citizens. Justice was fast and very, very public. Punishments were often carried out in the town square at a pillory, making it crystal clear to everyone what the consequences were for breaking the city's rules. It was all about maintaining order. And those taxes people paid, they didn't just disappear into some noble's far-off castle. They were reinvested right back into the city. People could actually see their money at work, building new bridges, strengthening the walls, or funding these magnificent churches that became towering symbols of their collective pride and power. When you start running your own show, you start thinking differently about society itself. For the first time, people began to talk about the bonum commune, the common good. Citizens started organizing their own social care for the poor and the sick, things that before had only really been handled by the church. They even started their own schools that taught in a local language, not Latin, and focused on practical skills that a merchant would actually need, like math. So it all leaves us with a pretty big final thought. This whole struggle for self-government, this brand new idea of a citizenry with rights and responsibilities, this focus on the common good, in so many ways, this is where our modern world began. So the question I'll leave you with is, how did their fight for independence centuries ago end up shaping our own ideas of what it means to be a free citizen today? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more.